Today we are going to be talking about the Aeldari rules preview and their faction focus. We are going to be talking about data cards, stratagems, rules, and so on. And in my opinion, it is one of the strongest ones we've seen yet. So let's cover why. If you enjoyed the content, consider leaving a thumbs up and subscribing, as well as checking the links down in the description below. My name is Deeplash, and this is Empire of Wargames. So the Aeldari have a lot to cover, and sadly enough the article is not going over everything. Those articles are meant to be short, and thus you're not going to find anything about Corsairs, Ynnari, or Harlequins. If you were hoping for any of that, you're not going to find it here. And I highly doubt we are going to get a specific faction focus for those factions. Harlequins might get one, depending on how they are going to get treated in the future, but I doubt we are going to get anything specific for Corsairs or Ynnari. And with that said, let's talk about the Aeldari rules. First up, we have the army rule, which is Strands of Fate. So if your faction is Aeldari, you're rolling 12d6, and you can reroll those, so you can mulligan them basically. And every time you do so, you're just removing one of the dice. So if you don't like your first 12 dice, you can just roll again and have a roll with 11 dice basically. And that is it. And you can do so until you're satisfied or until just 1d6 is remaining. I hope that most people are going to be professional about this one and just reroll once or twice, because rerolling for all eternity is, for one, not that great for you and not that great for your opponent either, because you're stalling. So that is one of the concerns here. But it's a very strong ability, and the rest is quite literally miracle dice. So you can replace one die of any one roll before rolling it, and the list you can see on the right hand side of the screen is the same that you can see on the miracle dice screen. So advanced rolls, battle shock tests, and so on is the exact same as for the sisters. So it is a very strong rule. I don't actually agree that it is a toned down rule, which I've seen a lot on social media. I think it has different applications. It is more front loaded than the sisters rule, which I personally like a lot more, because Warhammer 40k, as much as we try to deny it, is a very front-loaded game. It is a very alpha-strikey game, and I think while 10th edition is going to mitigate that a little bit, it is not going to be quite enough. And having 12 dice on your first turn is going to be very effective, and in my opinion stronger than what the sisters have with the miracle dice. Now, I think that the sisters' miracle dice rule is a little bit worse. They have the benefit that I think the longer the game goes, the more dice they're going to generate, and I think their dice generation is going to be more reliable than the ones from the Aeldari. So I think they're going to balance it that way. Aeldari are probably going to be more front-loaded, while sisters are going to be more reliable towards the end of the game. So an interesting way to handle an army rule. I think it's decent, but we've also lost quite a lot. Battle focus and so on is not here anymore, and it is also not a detachment rule, so that's a spoiler. I personally really like the army rule. Strands of Fate has always been a fun way to interact with your dice rolls. You're obviously going to be able to manipulate your Strands of Fate. We are going to talk about that once we take a look at the data cards, and you're going to be able to generate more of them. But having a front-loaded miracle dice pool is just a very, very strong thing to have, because reliability above all is something that is just very, very important in Warhammer and in any game that uses a lot of dice. So yeah, it's just a really cool armor rule that I personally don't think is much worse, if at all, compared to what they had in 9th edition, where you could just roll 6 dice, keep 4 of them, and then use those specific rolled dice for, I don't know, depending on what you rolled, for a charge roll or so on, and you always treat it as a 6. That is obviously not the case anymore. You have to deal with whatever you get, but you can reroll them. And you can obviously manipulate them, which we are going to talk about later on. And obviously, the dice you're going to be using are counting as natural rolls or unmodified dice rolls. So if you're using any 6s, which you're going to be using quite a lot, those are going to be counting as critical hits or critical wounds or whatever have you. Now, the detachment rule segment is sadly going to be quite short. I don't think it's bad by any means, but it is just very, very bland. This one reads Unparalleled Foresight. Each time an Aeldari unit from your army is selected to shoot or fight, you can reroll 1 hit roll and 1 wound roll. And that is it. It's very bland. It reminds me very much of Necrons, where you just get +1 to the hit roll, I think, as long as you have a character attached to a unit. And this one is very similar. It kind of wants you to go for MSUs, so minimum sized units, so you can use this quite a lot. As far as I understand the rule, you can use it once in your shooting phase and then again in your fight phase with the same unit. I don't see why that wouldn't be possible. So you can technically reroll 4 dice per unit if you first shoot and then charge and get into melee. That would be entirely possible. So I don't think it's bad. It is especially strong for something like fire prisms or just very strong single target attacks like what you have on your weapon turret for your Guardian Defenders, which we are going to talk about in a second. So for those kinds of things, it is very strong. But just in general, it is a very uninspiring rule, and just compared to what the Adeptus Mechanicus had, which is a very narrative-driven rule and a very kind of, it feels very flamboyant, for lack of a better word. And this one is just bland, effective. It does what it has to. It is definitely going to help you win the game, and it is great to have that rule, but it's just bland. So my opinion, strong but boring. Next up, we are going to talk about the Farseer, which I much prefer to see over the Avatar of Khaine. Well, Avatar of Khaine is a cool model, having those standard leader choices that are definitely going to be in your army most of the time, and that are there to definitely support your entire army much more than those big Gilliman leader choices and centerpiece models. I think your baseline leader choices from an army should have been previewed in all of the articles. So it is great to see the Farseer here. Still a movement of 7, still a toughness of 3, save 6 up, which doesn't matter. 4 wounds, so went down, is a little bit squishier now. A leadership of 6 and an OC of 1. So all in all, it is very much the same. The leadership is kind of comparable. Previously a leadership of 9, could be a leadership of 6 now, so I think it's decent. 1 less wound is a choice that GW made. I don't quite agree with it because 4 wounds is literally very little. And even 5 wounds was kind of squishy. So it is what it is. So we'll see if that gets reflected in the points value of the Farseer. Then when we look at the weapons, we have our psychic weapon with Eldritch Storm, which has a range of 24 inches, D6 attacks, a ballistic skill of 3, strength 6, AP -2, damage 3. So on average, you are going to delete Space Marines with this one and any kind of infantry. So this is a great psychic ability. D6 attacks is a little bit volatile, but on average, you're going to be sitting at 3.5 attacks, which I think is decent. Whenever you roll a 1, it's going to be a feel bad, which is why I prefer 2d3 at all times. But it is what it is. It is a very strong psychic attack. And yeah, I personally like Eldritch Storm quite a lot. It has the blast rule, so there is where your ability comes in, especially against infantry, because as I said previously, blast means +1 attack for each 5 models in the opposing unit. So 30 Orc Boys means D6 +6 attacks, which is a lot. Then we have the Shuriken Pistol, and this is a strong surprise. We are going to talk about that when we get to the Guardian Defenders. This one has the Assault rule, so you can advance and still shoot without any penalties in 10th edition. It is a pistol, so you can use it in melee. It has a range of 12. You're hitting on 2s for -1/1. So Shuriken weapons retain their AP -1, which is insane to think about. But something that is missing is the Shuriken rule, so kind of the Blade Storm rule. Whenever you roll a 6 on your wound roll, previously 9th edition, you would get an additional -2 AP to your attack. That seems to be gone, but instead of losing 1 AP like every other army, we get to retain ours. So that is great to see. I personally prefer reliability a lot more than having a couple of shots having exploding AP. That's my opinion at least. Then we have the Singing Spear, Assault, and Psychic. Psychic is just a keyword that is probably going to interact a lot with defensive abilities in case you're curious. We've seen the Librarian in Terminator armor have defensive abilities specifically against psychic attacks, so also against the Singing Spear. This one is 12 inches, 1 attack at range, ballistic skill 2, strength 9, AP 0, damage 3. So basically unchanged. It is the same weapon, and it is still weird to see that stat line. 903 is just kind of difficult to parse, but effective all the same, because if you're targeting a Terminator and if that person happens to really screw up their save, it can hit quite hard. And last but not least, we have the melee weapons with the Singing Spear in melee, which is 2 attacks, weapon skill 2, 303. So very similar, but your strength goes way down. I'm very surprised that the Singing Spear is not getting any infantry wounding on 2 ups. That is kind of missing a little bit here. I'm not sure. The Witchblade in turn has it. It has anti-infantry 2 up, psychic, and it has the same profile except it does 1 less damage. So the Witchblade is better in melee, and the Singing Spear offers you a ranged attack. Not sure which I prefer. Probably none of them. Actually, the Singing Spear is better because I don't really want my Farseer in melee and to just blow up and die with 4 wounds. So I prefer the Singing Spear, I guess. Both weapons, a little bit weird. You're taking him because of his supportive abilities and because of Eldritch Storm. Let's be real here. So the melee and ranged weapons are just kind of decorative. When we look at the keywords, we have character, infantry, psyker, and Farseer. Basically what we expect. There's nothing special to be seen here. The abilities are leader, strengths of fate, and then we have 2 very interesting abilities. First up, we have branching fates. Once per turn, when you use a fate dice on a substitute roll for a model or a unit within 12 inches of the Farseer model from your army, one model from your army which has the ability can use it. If it does, the result of the fate dice is changed to a 6. Very complicatedly written. That's because of the entire, competitive rules writing. But what it says is that if you're within 12 inches of a Farseer, if you have the Strengths of Fate rule, and you're using a die that is, for example, a 1, you can just turn it into a 6. That's what it says. Very strong, very reliable, and it probably makes the Farseer, if he's not just very, very expensive, just a must-have in the army, I think. It's just a very good ability. It is once per turn, don't get me wrong, but it is just a massive reliability boost, and it lets you spend your bad dice on something. Because as far as we know right now, we don't have an outlet for 1s or 2s. At least not as far as I know. So, yeah, Branching Fates is, in my opinion, very, very strong and helps you get rid of those bad dice. Then we have Fortune. In your command phase, you can roll 1d6 on a 2-up, select one friendly Aeldari unit within 12 inches of this psyker. Until the start of your next command phase, each time an attack targets that unit, subtract 1 from the wound roll. This is just Fortune, which is way more reliable. On a 2-up, you're talking about a 16.66% fail chance, which was previously way higher. So yeah, it is a more reliable psychic ability. Fortune as we know it, subtract 1 from the wound roll. Your army is admittedly most of the time going to be quite squishy, but you can still cast Fortune on wraiths and so on. So those are going to make very strong use of this. Guardian Defenders, is it that important if they are getting wounded on a 6 or on a 5? It makes a difference, but not so much. Still, I think Fortune is very good, and having it being more reliable is just an upside all around. Now, do these 2 abilities mean that we are not going to get any other psychic abilities at all for our psychic models? We are still not 100% sure. I still hope and hold out for the information that psychic abilities are going to be similar to what spells are in Age of Sigmar, where you have your baseline abilities written on the data card, and you can still pick 1 additional psychic ability from the codex or from the book or from wherever. So I still hope that is the case, but we don't know for sure. So for now, we have to expect that this is all the Farseer can do. But with an invulnerable save of 4+ and everything else we've seen, I think the Farseer is going to be just a must-have in an army if he's not too expensive, as I said. Really cool data card, in my opinion, very strong, considering all the nerfs that all the other factions have received. And even if the Farseer stays the way he is right now with Branching Fates and Fortune, I still think having one of them is going to be mandatory. Now, talking about strong data cards, let's talk about the Guardian Defenders, because they've always been very bad. At least as far as I returned after 7th edition, they've been just terrible in 8th and not that great in 9th. So now we are talking about a movement of 7, a toughness of 3, a 4-up save, which they retained. They have 1 wound, a leadership of 6-up, which is incredible, and an OC of 2. Then the heavy weapons platform is basically the same thing with 1 additional wound, and heavy weapons platform shows us yet again why the invulnerable save is not listed below the actual save. We are going to have more units with double profiles, and yeah, that space is just necessary for that. I understand that a lot of people want the invulnerable save to be listed below the regular save if possible, but I don't know. It is a give and take. But when it comes to regular stat line, Guardian Defenders are just incredible. They retained their save, their movement is still the best in the game. The toughness and the wounds are obviously unchanged, but the leadership of 6-up is incredible. So I'm very happy with what I'm seeing here. And funnily enough, it doesn't stop here. When we look at the ranged weapons, most of them are obviously for your heavy weapons platform. We have the Aeldari missile launcher at 1 attack, strength 10, AP -2 damage 6, so this is your single target attack, or if you use it as Sunburst, you are getting these 6 attacks with the Blast special rule, hitting on 3s, strength 4, AP -1, damage 1. Very, very cool. The Aeldari missile launcher stays the kind of flexible weapon that you can use and have a use case for at all times, and that is why I really love the weapon. And I'm glad to see that the Sunburst mode basically has still retained an AP of -1, while the regular missile launcher profile has an AP of -2. Very good weapon. Next up, we are going to talk about the Brightlands, and this one is quite interesting, so I want to talk about it for a little longer. This one went from strength 8, which could wound anything on a 3 up, to strength 12, which definitely cannot wound anything on a 3 up. You're going to be wounding Land Raiders on 4s and Monoliths on 5s. I would have wished that the Brightlands would go up to strength 14, so you can at least wound the Monolith on a 4. But all things considered, it is still a very strong weapon that just shows us how valuable vehicles are that have a toughness that is higher than 12. That is going to be a huge defensive boost for your vehicles. And yeah, just something to consider when looking at these weapons. The AP has gone down by 1, which is fine. AP -3 is still strong. And the damage is D6 + 2 rather than damage D3 + 3. It is very similar when it comes to damage. The AP went down by 1 and the strength is a little bit weaker. So all in all, the Brightlands is weaker than it was before, but still probably one of your best choices when it comes to anti-vehicle firepower that is not on a vehicle per se, but rather, you know, with your Guardian Defender, so it is fine. Now, while the Brightlands wasn't that exciting, the Scatter Laser isn't that exciting either. We are talking about 6 attacks at Ballistic Skill 3, 501. The Scatter Laser is honestly not going to be that useful in 10th edition at all. I don't see it being used against anything other than Horde factions, like for example Tyranids or, you know, Imperial Guard. But even then, just having something like the Shuriken Cannon that you can see below adds just way more value in any other case. So I'm not a fan of the Scatter Laser at all, and yeah, that weapon just needed something else, like more attacks or something, to really differentiate it from the other weapons you have access to. The Aeldari missile launcher and so on just offers the flexibility you need, while also having enough punch to go through a Rhino, for example. It's just way better. So I don't see any use cases for the Scatter Laser except very select armies, and those armies need to bring very select units. So I'm not a fan of the Scatter Laser at all. Meanwhile, the Shuriken Cannon, as I said, we've lost the Shuriken rule it seems, but it has the Sustained Hits 1 rule, and it is a 6 -1/2 weapon, which is ideal against any kind of infantry. And with 3 attacks and Sustained Hits 1, you're probably going to get enough hits in there to make it worth your while. So the Shuriken Cannon seems solid. Now we are coming to the Shuriken Catapult, which is obviously what your regular Guardian Defenders are wearing and using. And this one is just incredible. We are talking about Assault, so advancing and shooting without any downside, range of 18 inches, 2 attacks, a Ballistic Skill 3, which they, as you can see, retained throughout all of their stats, with strength 4, AP -1, damage 1. We already talked about this with the Shuriken Pistol, but it is so great to see that this weapon was not nerfed in any kind of way, except for losing the Shuriken rule. It's a very strong weapon. Like in all cases, it's basically a bolter with a shorter range, but with the assault rule. And with a movement of 7, you are going to get your value out of this one, and you are going to get in range. So yeah, the Shuriken Catapult is a very strong weapon carried by Battle Line. That is my opinion at least. And the Star Cannon is also for your heavy weapon platform. This one has 2 attacks, 8 -3, 2. So this is for elite infantry and very light vehicles. This one also has a kind of narrow use case scenario compared to the Brightlands and the Aeldari missile launcher, but at least I can see some value here compared to the Scatter Laser. So the Star Cannon is fine. It is still nerfed. It was previously strength 7, which is now strength 8, which is a strong downgrade when we look at them in the context of the additions. The AP is the same and the damage is the same though, so I guess it's fine. My personal favorite here is the Aeldari missile launcher and the Brightlands, but yeah, the Brightlands is still nerfed, kind of. So yeah, the weapon platform is a little bit weaker than it was before in the context of the new edition. Meanwhile, the Guardian Defenders are in all aspects just incredible units. I hope they are not going to be too expensive, but if they retain a reasonable price point, I think that the Guardian Defenders are going to be a mainstay for the entire army. But not just for their weapons and stats, but also for their abilities. The melee weapon is not worth mentioning. It is just exactly what you expect. Now, when we look at the abilities, we have Defenders of Fate. At the end of your command phase, for each objective marker you control that has one or more units from your army with this ability within range of it, roll 1d6 and add it to your Fate dice pool, displaying the result you just rolled. So this is very similar to the ability that the Sisters of Battleguard or the Battle Sister Squad. You're standing on an objective and you're generating more dice. Very strong, very effective. Probably why Guardian Defenders and Storm Guardians are going to be a must-have in your army. Let's be real. It's just an incentive to bring your battle line. And then we have Crude Platform. When the last Guardian Defender model in this unit is destroyed, any remaining heavy weapon platform models in this unit are also destroyed. So this tells me that, you're just going to have the heavy weapon platform there shooting on its own, while you have 10 Guardian Defenders shooting with their weapons. At least that's what this rule tells me. So yeah, very good all around. Defenders of the Fate is going to make them a very reliable choice. I hope Storm Guardians are going to get a similar ability or the exact same one. Their weapon profiles are great. At least some of them, not all of them. As I said, Scatter Laser and Star Cannon are a little bit Bright Lens a little bit nerfed. The Aeldari Missile Launcher just seems incredible in my opinion. And their stat line and basic Shuriken Catapult are just amazing. So this data card is stacked. I really like this one. Next up, we are going to be talking about the weapon profile of the Fire Prism, the Prism Cannon. This one has two weapon modes as always, and we have a special weapon ability we are going to cover in a second. So let's compare them to 9th edition. So as you can see here, we have a 60-inch range, which is the same at a weapons profile of 2d6 attacks, which was previously 3d3, and a ballistic skill of 3 at a profile of 6, -1, 2. So the AP went down by 1, but it retains its blast rule, and it is a little bit less reliable with 2d6 compared to 3d3. But it is still an absolutely fine mode to attack infantry with, so yeah, there's really not much more to complain about here. Now we have the focused lances. This one has the linked fire rule, and it has the same range at 2 attacks, ballistic skill 3 up, strength 18, AP -4, damage 6. Now this is very, very strong compared to what it had previously at 2 attacks, strength 14, AP -5, 3d3 damage. It is technically speaking weaker, but with the linked fire ability and considering all the nerfs a lot of weapons, especially the heavier ones, have received in 10th edition, I think this weapon is perfectly in line as an anti-tank weapon, and it is perfectly adept at killing vehicles, especially if you make use of the linked rule and bring more prism cannons. So the linked fire rule reads, when selecting targets for this weapon, you can measure range and determine visibility from another friendly fire prism model that is visible to the bearer. So that means each fire prism fires separately, but when linked, you can measure or check the visibility from whichever one you choose. So you can have one prism with full view of the battlefield and another one or two tucked away safely behind cover, and basically channel their shots through the one that is out in the open. Great for sniping tanks, etc., but at the cost of potentially losing the opportunity to use your disperse pools against infantry. So it is a strong functionality rule, a very good ability if you want to hide away your vehicles, which Aeldari vehicles, as you know, are quite squishy. But, while this is very effective for tank sniping, as I said, against infantry, it loses a lot of value. Yeah, all in all, my first impression on this weapon is very positive. I think it's a strong weapon that is going to do exactly what it is advertised to do. It is going to be effective against infantry and against vehicles, and that is just the flexibility we like to see from Aeldari weaponry. And last but not least, we have the Fire and Fate Stratagem. This one still costs 2 CP, which is quite expensive, especially considering we've lost battle focus, and it has some restrictions to it. So at the end of the shooting phase, one Aeldari unit from your army can make a normal move. So there's no rolling 1d6 anymore or anything. You make your declared 7-inch move if you're using the stratagem, for example, on your regular Aeldari Guardian Defenders. So in that case, it won a lot of reliability, which is great. But the restrictions are you cannot select an aircraft unit or a unit within engagement range of one or more enemy units until the end of the turn. The unit you selected is not eligible to declare a charge. So there are a lot of restrictions and downsides for this one. I think the biggest problem of Fire and Fate as it is written here are not the restrictions or anything, it is the 2 CP cost. Considering how scarce CP is going to be in 10th edition, and with no knowledge of how Aeldari are going to gain their CP in addition to the regular CP you gain at the start of each turn, this is just very, very expensive, and you're probably going to use it very rarely, if at all. If any of the other stratagems is just slightly better than this one. I think 2 CP stratagems should be, dedicated to some stratagems that are just incredibly strong that you're probably going to use once per game and call it a day just because they're so expensive. I think Fire and Fade here seems a little bit overcosted, but that might be just my opinion. If you have any opinion on this one, drop it in the comments below. So that was the faction focus for the Aeldari. I think it is a very positive one of the strongest one we've seen. Strands of Fate is great, the detachment rule is boring but very effective. The Farseer as well as the Guardian Defenders are just amazing. Both data cards are very strong. The Prism Cannon is effective. The only thing I have a slight gripe with is the Fire and Fate stratagem, considering we've lost Battle Focus and it is still 2 CP, which I think is just too expensive for what it does. But yeah, it is what it is. For 1 CP, you would probably spam it too much. So I have no idea how to balance Fire and Fate, to be completely honest. If you have any opinions on this video, on any kind of things I said, if I've missed anything, please drop it in the comments below. I would love to discuss things there. Other than that, we are going to cover the Death Guard faction focus tomorrow. So if you're interested in that, consider subscribing. Other than that, I hope this was insightful and I hope to see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.